Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock in Germany, and good morning to startups from the one side of the world, and good evening or good afternoon to our startups from the other side of the world. Welcome to Startup Germany Tour 2020, the digital edition, and I would like to welcome you to our very own and very traditional webinar, Going International. The tour Startup Germany Tour 2020 is of course made possible through the partners worldwide, and of course I would like to mention especially the network of the German Chambers of Commerce abroad, the Chambers of Commerce and Industry in the Rhineland and the Ruhr region, especially the IHK Dortmund. And of course, I would like to thank nrw.invest, our economic development agency, for making this year's tour possible. Today, we want to guide you to some issues that you might encounter if you deal with Germans, especially with German business, and if it comes to international contracts or international contract laws, then this might be the right webinar for you. But first of all, let me explain the housekeeping rules a little bit. So, my name is Katrin Lange, and I'm executive in the International Department of the Düsseldorf Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And of course, I would like to welcome you, but as always, there are some rules to our webinar. So before we start, I would like to explain the basic functions of your webinar room. In the top menu bar, you will find two icons, a speaker and a hand signal icon. Use the small triangles next to the icons to make your very individual settings. You can turn your speakers or headphones on or off and adjust the volume. With the hand signal, you can communicate your status or tell us or the moderators whether they should speak louder, quieter, faster, or slower. You can also use the question area below the slides, and you're free to type your questions, your remarks, your comments, and everything into this question field. You can also ask questions that's not only on the topic, but also if you have particular questions regarding the Startup Germany Tour 2020. So much for the settings, and I think now we can start with our webinar, and let's get some content in here today. So first of all, I would like to introduce the speakers today. The speakers are Mr. Robert Butschen. He is the contact person in our Chamber of Commerce and Industry with regards, if you have questions with regards to markets in Europe and Middle East or Africa, if you have any questions regarding trade fairs, business partner search or financing issues. Then the second speaker is Savas Peuratz. He is a consultant in the field of customs and foreign trade law, and he will guide you a little bit through the import and export regulations that you might encounter when you bring goods from A to Z. And of course, I will talk a little bit about some legal terms that you might want to know about, some legal terms that you might find in international contracts. And we hope that you enjoy the webinar and have fun. I'm going to wish you a nice hour, and now it's a turn for Mr. Butschen.
Okay, yes, good morning everybody. Welcome to Düsseldorf Chamber. Welcome to many different countries, as what I heard. So my name is Robert Butschen, and usually I'm here in the Düsseldorf Chamber I'm contacted by people with any business for European markets, mostly European markets, looking for business partners, having questions about legal things, about anything which concerns their business in Europe and the Middle East. And today I have the pleasure to do it the other way around. Yeah, so today I would like to give you some ideas, some advice maybe on how to get on the German market and how to find business partners especially. Yeah, because the major problem for setting up international business is finding business partners. Without business partners, well, you cannot sell anything or buy anything, whatever you would like to do. Speaking about maybe, first of all, some strategic approaches. We do a difference between a reactive strategy and an active strategy. Those who are working on a reactive strategy usually are in the kind of, let me say, comfort mode, because they are contacted from all over the world. People got interested in what they have to offer, and now you can send proposals and go into discussion. That's nice. You know, big companies which have big brands worldwide work like that. But we are all startups. So I have to assume that we are not as known as a big car manufacturer, for instance. So we probably have to just contact possible and identified business partners. And of course, we have to find information who might be the right markets, who might be the right sectors to contact in which country, and what are special characteristics, what are the volumes, what are the expectations. And so we have to define probably an active strategy. Just let me give you some indicators for these strategies. What you see here is an approach for a strategy on volume markets, yeah? And that's a little bit from the German perspective. This is nothing else but the top 10 of the German export and import partners. And so maybe the German export side, which is the left side here on the slide, is not as interesting to you than the other side. Well, we sell most of our goods to the United States and to France and to China. Yeah, okay, that's maybe not that surprising. We purchase our goods in China, in the Netherlands, and in the United States on position 3. The Netherlands, yeah, that might be surprising for many people in Germany. Anyway, so what the message I want to give to you is maybe you have a look at volumes, you have a look on what's happening between markets, and that gives you an indication to which market you might go. By the way, you get the slides afterwards, yeah, so you do not have to take notes. You can review everything very accurately and calmly after our webinar. Speaking about volume markets, and now I want to go a little bit into detail about Germany. These are the share of the German Bundesländer on the general import, yeah. And on position 1, you see our state nrw, Nordrhein-Westphalia, followed by Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, yeah. And here you see where international companies do their business in Germany, yeah. So the biggest share happens here in our area, in the Rhineland area, the Westphalen area, Ruhr area, with the capital Düsseldorf. Yeah, so choosing to have a look on Düsseldorf and Nordrhein-Westfalen as an international startup probably is not the worst thing. This goes back a little bit to the slide I had before, and I just want to let you know not only about the volumes of imports we have in Germany, but also about the trend and how dynamic this market has been. And what you see here, that's before Corona obviously, is the development of the imports in the years from 2014 to 2019. And what you see is, for instance, with China, we had 37% more than in 2014. With the USA, even more than China, yeah, even more, a higher increase of import volume, and even more with Poland. And this is a good indication on defining which countries the development is quite dynamically. Yeah, so this might be another indication for you. What I want to tell you with the next slide is that you maybe have to take yourself questions, yeah? Thinking about approaching the German market, can I be found in Germany, or do I have to search, yeah? That's maybe, well, especially for startups, one of the most questions, because of course you're working with digital instruments, and in Corona times, of course, you are working more digital than before, probably. How can I be found? Yeah, so that has to do, of course, with the web appearance. How can I communicate with my international partners, especially German partners? Maybe I tell you a story about what happened last week. Last week I got contacted by a startup from the Middle East, and I got contacted by a LinkedIn message. To be honest, I didn't find that very seriously. Yeah, and it was, well, I couldn't answer him, tell him all the information I wanted to give him by LinkedIn, yeah, so I first had to find out his email address and so on and so on. In Germany, it might be that we are a little bit more conservative on that than you in your country. It might be, just to let you know. And last question on this slide, may I sell my products in Germany or in the European Union? Yes, so please check legal issues on what you like to do here. Now I want you to get familiar with 6 ways to know the German markets, to know companies on the German markets, and to communicate with German companies. And what you should do, or maybe what you can do, is telling me, well, defining for yourself if this might be useful or not, if this is suitable for your business model or if it's not. I don't know. Yeah, you have to define it for yourself, but I just want to let you know some instruments which you can use on getting familiar with the German markets. First of all, a quite traditional thing, identification of company with the help of databases. Yeah? In earlier times, when we didn't have the internet, we had to look into big books, into big directories, and we had to find companies on different sectors, on different regions. Today, this goes all with the help of the internet. And if I tell you websites like Compass, Europages, or wlw.de, these are probably the most common pages if you are looking for certain companies in Germany. Yeah? If you are looking for traders, for instance, for importers, for garden chairs, you might find them in WLW. If you are looking for manufacturers of garden chairs, you might find them in Europages, just as an idea. So if you have a clear idea about target groups, about certain sectors you would like to work with, this might not be the worst idea to have a look on these platforms. In Germany, we have sectorial federations for quite everything. Yeah, some of them are very big and very powerful, some are quite small. If you would like to target the machine engineering industry, you should know that there is a very big federation called VDMA, and you can see the members on the member directory of vdmah.org. Same applies to the chemical industry, if that's the sector. Same applies also to the digital industry. Yeah, we have quite a strong federation for the digital industry called Bitkom. But if you're trading with honey, we also have a small federation of honey traders. Yeah, and so you find in Germany something like a association, federation of companies for quite everything, and we usually used to have some helpful information on their websites. Another measure is working with corporation databases, and just give 2 examples from our international business promotion company of our state, nrw Europa. With this link, this link allows you to search for business partners in Germany and in other countries via the European Enterprise Network. And on federal level, we have Xpos, a business finder, also allowing you to search for partners, but also allowing you to set and to publish your own proposal to the German market. Number 2, trade shows. Of course, I was more happy to speak about trade shows in terms before Corona. At the moment, the situation is quite critical. We do not have any big trade show coming up in Düsseldorf this year. Anyway, trade shows for Germany are crucial. Yeah? And you have to know that Germany is the most important country for trade shows in the world. We have 7 of the biggest 10 European trade fairgrounds, well, in Germany. And the most international one is, by the way, Düsseldorf. Yeah? There is no other place with so many international trade shows than Düsseldorf. For instance, some examples: Medica for the medical industry, Interpack for packaging industry, Glastec for glass manufacturing, K for plastic industries, tube and wire for metal processing sectors, and many more. So what would I like to tell to you? Even if you are not able to exposit on those trade shows or to visit those trade shows, you can use the directories in order to find the right partners if you're working in one of these sectors. If you're looking for the right trade show in Germany, I can recommend to have a look on this site, auma.de, AUMA, also available in English, and that gives you a whole survey on trade shows which take place usually in Germany and also in other parts of the world. Number 3, sectorial business media. In Germany, we are quite strong with publishing papers or having nowadays web platforms which are serving, let me say, difficult sectors, difficult target groups. You have the same in your country, but even if you do not know German or even you have a little knowledge of German language, it might be useful to have a look, for instance, on these platforms. If you are in retail trade, the number 1 is lebensmittelzeitung.net. If you are in agricultural engineering, agrarheute.com. Some of them have also contents in English, yeah, in order to get to know the German sector in your special target group. You should know about these platforms and about these media. Number 4, delegations and trade missions. Yeah. First of all, I have to congratulate to you. Yeah. So being part of the Startup Germany tour, you are already a little bit part of such an instrument. Yeah. But there are definitely, I hope there are also things, trips, delegation trips offered in your country. Maybe 2 events in with us. Yeah, in Düsseldorf. Yeah, we have a Startup week in Düsseldorf, which just recently went by. It was last week, and we used to have international delegations of startups also during the Startup week. And we have another flagship event in Düsseldorf, Digital Demo Day, taking place every year in February, and we hope that we will have the next edition of that here physically in February 21, according to the COVID-19 situation. Number 5, the Ahk Network. So we here in Düsseldorf, we are IHK, we are part of the German Chamber Network, and we have an international Chamber Network as well. And I think most of you are in contact with those Ahk offices in your respective countries. Yeah, and of course you can contact these Ahk German chambers abroad for anything you would like to know and for any support you are looking to get on the German market. Yeah, there are 140 offices in more than 90 countries, so probably also in the countries you are based. And well, you have to also to know that they are financed by services, so you do not get everything for free. But anyway, you will get some good ideas what you might do in order to get on the German market, and you have also access to probably useful networks which might help you getting on the German markets. And last but not least, your web presence. Yeah, adaptation to German standards. I wouldn't say it's not necessary to do it in a 100% way, but you have to know that. Well, it's also a source for maybe doing some things wrong. The key message is pure translation into German is not sufficient. Yeah, if it's not been done by a native speaker, it usually has an effect of being a little bit ridiculous to us. Yeah, and sometimes you start to laugh when you look at websites which are translated in a not very professional way. On the other hand, adapt the content. Yeah, have a clear look on measures, currencies, cultural standards, and also legal requirements. Yeah, so it's better to get some professional help on doing that than just publishing something in German or something in which you might think that it's German, but it is. Also adapt the search engine optimization. Yeah, so when you are quite successful in getting found with some keywords, it doesn't mean that you are successful in getting found in Germany. Yeah. Question of domain. Yeah. If you are thinking about something .com or .de, if you would like to adapt your website on that. And of course, you have to define in which language or which country you want to use and you want to contact it with. Yeah. If I see a German website, I may assume that I can contact my counterpart also in German language. And please be aware that not everybody in Germany is aware of English, still today. How can I be contacted? Yeah, of course there are different ways to publish the way to get contacted on a website. Yeah, I gave you the examples of the LinkedIn contact last week, which I didn't find very useful. And of course you have to adapt legal standards, even or especially when you're starting to do some e-commerce activities, to start an online shop, which is addressing to German customers. Yeah, these are just some ideas. Yeah, you can find them good. You do not have to. Maybe they're useful for you. Not everything is useful for you. I'm quite sure of that. Anyway, I hope that you get some ideas and some good impulses what you might do in order to get familiar with the German markets. And now I switch over to Katrin Langebeck again, and she will give you some useful info about international contracts. Yeah, when it comes that you are getting an agreement with the German partners, what you have to look after.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Butchen. And usually people think that legal issues or law issues are quite boring, but yeah, the thing is you have to be aware of it, and you may find it boring, but you have to get acquainted to some of the terms that you might encounter during your life as a startup, and especially if you negotiate contracts, you should know what you are talking about. So today I can only give you some hints. I can only point out some certain hot topics, but of course usually the subject goes much deeper, and I only can touch a little bit on the surface today. And if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the question field under the slides, and either we will answer your questions today during the webinar, or later on I will get in contact with you if it's a really specific and individual question. So what's the agenda for the next 10 to 15 minutes? Those are the topics I want to touch on, and here we start. So the first thing are some general remarks. First of all, you should really take into account who is my contract partner. Please consider that your partner is from another country, that he might have a different intercultural background, that certain intercultural aspects might be important to your business partner. So especially if you negotiate a contract, you should always keep in mind that some things that are normal to you might not be the case for your business partner. So in some regions of the world, a contract is merely the minimum consensus that two parties reach, and then from that contract we negotiate further on. In some other legal cultures, a contract is totally binding, there's no negotiation after that, and so you should always ask yourself, so what is the intercultural background of my partner? And not only that is an aspect if it comes to forming a law or a contract, it's also how to end contracts. Then the legal culture. Of course, we have civil law, for instance, we have common law, but other law circles are there as well, like Islamic law. So civil law is pretty common, of course, in Germany, France, and common law is pretty common, for instance, in the United States. Language. So what does it mean? That means the language of a contract. So you should always define one language that is binding for the contract, so that is applicable if it comes to the interpretation of a contract. So usually what we see in international contracts are like a two-column contract. One is a binding language, the other one is only the translation of this binding part, and if it comes to conflict, then only the binding language will be used in order to interpret what the partners wanted. Another point, what we see as IHK, where people are too careless, is to think about the reliability of a contract partner. So sometimes people get contracted via email, or Mr. Butchen already said, via LinkedIn, and that is still something that you need to find out, is it a serious business approach, and is the business partner serious about the offer that he makes. And we always recommend that you check your business partners, and the good news is that the German Chambers of Commerce abroad, that they offer, most of them offer business partner checks. So a background check of your partner might be very useful, and you could save lots of money in the end. And last but not least, from that side, proxy, make sure that the person who is signing the contract, that this person was allowed to sign the contract. Okay, the second thing we want to talk about is the governing law of a contract. That is something that companies often forget. You should state within your contract what is the law that is applicable to your contract. That is also really important if it comes to conflicts. And you could choose, for instance, German law, but you could also choose your country's law, or it's also because we have the freedom of contracting. In Germany, this is really upheld very high. So you could also choose a third country law which you want to apply to your contract. If that's practical, I don't know, but at least you should have heard about this choice of law you have to make. If you choose German law, and we are talking about international contracts today, be aware that German law also includes the so-called United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods. Right now, there are 94 countries that are part of this treaty, and Germany is part of this treaty since 1991. So if we have an international contract and you said, well, I want German law to apply to my international contract, then the so-called United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods is automatically part of your contract. So another thing that companies always ask us is the catchment area of certain laws. This is always something, if you are an expatriate, or if we talk about expatriation of qualified personnel, then we talk about working laws, social security laws, tax laws, etc. But it's also relevant for some legal institutions, especially in Germany. There are some so-called legal institutions that are known and typically for German law, but not very known to other laws, national laws. And then it can be that you have some institution within your contract, but this institution is not applicable because a certain national law does not know this institution. Okay, hot topic number 3, court of jurisdiction, and number 4, arbitration. So this goes a little bit hand in hand. You should always regulate in your contract where you want to settle your conflicts. So you should state really precisely what is the city and the country where you want to settle your conflict. So it's basically a triers. So always think about the language of your contract, then what is the governing law, and then of course what is the court of jurisdiction. And as I said before, you can have the court of jurisdiction in Germany, but you can govern the law, the contract under a different law. Everything is possible here. You should always keep in mind if it's practical and if it's possible in the other country. So if you are the one that is having a conflict with some person, if a certain sentence is then, if you can use this verdict in the other country. Okay, number 4, arbitration. There are numerous institutions that offer legal arbitration, and arbitration is something different than mediation. You can also have the term mediation in your contract, and that usually means that you try to negotiate a conflict before you go to court. But arbitration is like going to court, but to a very special court. And there are numerous institutions that offer arbitration. I think very common are, for instance, as institutions, the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, but also the DIS, it's the German arbitration organization. We also have very famous arbitration courts in Zurich, in London, in Stockholm, in Shanghai. You should always, if you are thinking about arbitration, you should always keep in mind that it's really expensive and that you use the right arbitration clause, if you can find the arbitration clause on the homepage of the arbitration court that you want to appeal to. Well, pros and cons. I think the con, especially for startups, is the price. And it's also, I mean, you can choose if you want to have one arbitrator or 3, and that makes it more expensive. So if you're talking about really, really high volumes, you should really think about arbitration. If you're doing like e-commerce and you're doing like bulkware that is really cheap, or you're just selling single items, it might not be so useful for you. And then one last word on general terms and conditions. Those are general and special arrangements, provisions, requirements, rules, specifications, and standards that are usually form an integral part of an agreement or a contract. And in Germany, that's really common. So if you're negotiating a contract with a big company or a medium-sized company, they usually will send you their allgemeine Geschäftsbedingungen. So those are general terms and conditions that they use for every contract. If you have general terms and conditions for your contracts, make sure, and they are really important to you, make sure that they are really a part of the original contract. So there are really there could be some occasions where the general terms and conditions will not be part of the contract. And so my advice would be, if you have really imminent things that are really important to you, try to put them in the real contract. So because there might be a risk that the general terms and conditions might not be part of the contract. And if it comes to a lawsuit, then there might be a discussion whether they are part of the contract or not. General terms and conditions, there might also be specific terms and conditions. That's also something that is used for international contracts. And maybe one really actual topic would be a force majeure clause. So during Corona crisis, some companies realized that they did not have a force majeure clause in their contracts. So that is something that they either now have in their general terms and conditions, or they have it in their contracts. And ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, they just released the English version of a really good force majeure clause, and you will find them on their website. So, and now you might ask, so, there are so many things I have to keep in mind. What should I do now? Should I go to a lawyer? Should I do it on my own? Should I do it maybe in my legal department that I have in my company? It depends. So it really depends if you want, if you are having a lawyer involved or not, especially in the startup world. It's quite common to have a lawyer because we're talking about IP, we are talking about non-disclosure, we are talking about investments, and so you should really consider paying a lawyer now instead of being sorry later. And in the end, there are some links where you will find further information, of course, on our website. But really, your local countrywide German chambers abroad, they have lots of legal information available for you. Germany Trade and Invest has very many links how to govern international contracts. The German embassies have lawyers lists, and of course, if you want to know more about the UN law, please go to this site. And that's for the international contracts. Well, to put it in a nutshell, that was very fast, very much. But now we come to topics that might be very interesting to you as well. Now we'll talk a little bit about cross-border movement of goods, imports, and exports. And I'm really happy that Savas Polratz is going to guide you through this subject.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Katrin Lange. Yeah, dear ladies and gentlemen, also a warm welcome from me from Düsseldorf. In the next minutes, I will guide you to the regulations of the cross-border movement of goods for imports and exports. I have prepared the following agenda to you. We will first of all have a look at the regulations, an overview of the regulations that are relevant for cross-border movement of goods. Afterwards, we will look at the prerequisites for imports and exports. Then we will look at the central subject, the customs tariff number, also called commodity number, commodity code. Then we will have a real quick look at the different forms of the origin of goods in foreign trades. Afterwards, I will give you an overview of the export control regulations of Germany, followed by the Inco Terms, and last but not least, the regulations of the destination country, the aspect checklist, import and export. Those are some links for you to use afterwards, where you can find information for your import and export activities into or out of Germany. If we start with the prohibitions and restrictions at the right above corner, those two words, they include a lot of legal aspects such as the protection of public order, the environmental protection, animal protection, human protection, intellectual property rights, phytosanitary measures, and the protection of cultural aspects of goods, which has to be taken care of in the cross-border movement of goods. Afterwards, in the next block, we have the so-called export control regulations. An example, the embargo measures of the European Union, or the authorization requirements for the exports of some goods. The customs law, I will sum it up real quick, that it's on a general basis required to launch an electronic customs declaration for your imports and for your exports. The customs procedures also can be divided in export and in import regulations. As I said, we will also have a look at the origin in goods in foreign trade aspects. The statistical aspects are not so relevant anymore due to the electronic processing of import and export activities. The value-added tax law is also playing an active role in imports or in exports. In terms of imports, your goods will be subject to the German VAT system, the value-added tax system, and exports are basically granted or exempt from the VAT, but you need a delivery notice for it. Then we will also have an overview to the delivery terms, most popular called the Inco Terms, where you clearly define the obligations between the seller and the buyer, and also the regulations of the destination country is also to be considered in the cross-border movement of goods. For instance, which documents are to be prepared by the seller for the importer. The precondition or the conditions for the import or export activities into Germany or out of Germany, there are basically two. First of all, you need to have a legal status of a company, so the requirement is here to set up a company in Germany. There are different company forms that you can use in order to fulfill that requirement, and the second step is the registration with the German Customs Authority for a so-called Economic Operators Registration Identification Number. The abbreviation that is used in general daily businesses, the EORI number. Here I have put up the link on that page where you can find also directly the application form for the EORI number. The customs tariff number, or alternatively called commodity code number, is based on the so-called harmonized commodity description and coding system, a 6-digit number which is used internationally in order to have a similar talk about goods that are traded globally on a cross-border basis. So the world knows approximately 5,400 HS codes. The European Union has extended or divided, more the so-called HS system and the so-called combined nomenclature in approximately 9,500 customs tariff numbers, which is an 8-digit code to be used for exports out of the European Union. And we should not forget that depending on the customs tariff number for exports or imports, the code number, which has 10 digits on a European basis and 11 for German purposes, it triggers different measures. On the import side, it determines the customs duties, the anti-dumping and countervailing duties, the additional duties, the taxes, if there is some prohibition or restriction on the goods to be imported, the approval and licensing requirements, and the tariff quotas are also determined by the code number into the European Union. For exports, it determines the export control regulations. If there is a free trade agreement, the first 4 digits of the customs tariff number, the heading of the HS is defining the preferential matters, the FTA matters of the European Union with third countries. The export duties, which are at the moment not active, and also if there is an approval or licensing requirement, it is also embedded into the customs tariff number. Here I have brought up an example for you for household dishwashing machine in order to illustrate you the technical jargon of the customs tariff number, commodity code, or code number. The first digits for a household dishwashing machine will be an 84. It's called the chapter of the harmonized system. Then we will find that product in the 8422. heading of the harmonized system is the technical definition of it, and the 84.22.11 is called the so-called the subheading of the harmonized system. So here we have the international setting worldwide. Household dishwashing machines should be classified under 84.22.11 coding, and for export purposes Germany has added 2 more numbers in terms of imports into the EU, especially to determine the EU measures. We have further subdivided that number into 10 digits, and Germany has added another digit to it in order to establish the German measure. So what is called the code number? When we speak of the code number, it is the 11th digit for a product to be imported into Germany. I have put up here some areas where you can receive support. Of course, the manufacturer of a good should be available to give you the HS code, at least an international manufacturer, the first 6 digits of a product that you are going to import or export out of Germany. You have always the option to apply for a so-called binding tariff decision with the customs authority in Germany. And there is also a leaflet that you can find on our website under the following document number from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Düsseldorf, which is quite extensive. The German customs authorization administration has also a so-called electronic customs tariff database where you can search for keywords. There are over 20,000 keywords embedded in that system in order to find your customs tariff number based on some keywords. And also a very useful tool to determine the customs tariff number is the so-called European Binding Tariff Information Database. I see I have forgot an O in the word of information. We will correct that. That database illustrates all the granted customs tariff decisions within the European Union, sometimes with pictures, so you can maybe find a similar product that has already received the binding tariff information in order to determine the customs tariff number, commodity code, or code number. The origin of goods in foreign trade, of course, does have also a role. When we start on the left side, we are speaking of the so-called preferential origin. Behind these 2 words are the free trade agreements of the European Union. So the purpose of the preferential origin is the application of the preferential customs duty, basically the reduction or the elimination of import duties in the destined country. An evidence tool of this is, for instance, the popular movement certificate EUR1, and the responsibility lies within this means with the customs administration. The second rule of origin, or the second block of origin, is the so-called non-preferential origin. The purpose within this means is the application of trade measures, and the evidence is being basically conducted with the certificate of origin, and the responsible authority in Germany are all the chambers of industry and commerce. And the third origin in foreign trade aspect is the so-called made-in marking origin. The purpose of it is, of course, historically geopression or false indication of the origin, and the evidence is being conducted by the product marking itself, and the responsible authority within this means are the courts. Here we have a specimen or a sample of an EU certificate of origin that are being issued with the Chambers of Commerce and Industry, especially for export purposes. On the left side you find the application form, which at the end of the day will stay with the Chamber of Commerce, and the original is on the right corner. And for some countries, sometimes you also need duplicates depending on the country of destinations. For instance, the United Arab Emirates also ask for duplicates. And the form will be the same, just on the yellow color. The export control is the next subject that I want to touch real briefly to you. Is according to the German Foreign Trade Law, the export of items, services, capital, payment, and the commercial traffic with foreign countries is principally free. However, there are some European and national prohibitions and restrictions, and those prohibitions and restrictions can be subdivided in three groups, in items, in embargoes, and critical use. If we speak of items, items are defined as goods, software, and technology on a European level. And also from a German perspective, there are some restrictions for the technical assistance. So we have to be careful when we are speaking of so-called dual-use goods, which are embedded in Annex 1 or on the national export list of Germany. Depending on the country that it is going, there might be a prohibition or a restriction. So when we speak of restrictions, there is an authorization required in order to export that product. The second group can be summed up real quick as the embargoed countries by the European Union. Like the popular ones at the moment is of course Iran and also Russia. And within the subject of embargoes, there is also a subtitle, the EU sanctions list, meaning persons, companies, organizations, and institutions where no business activities are allowed. For instance, I call them Al-Qaeda in France as an example. There is no possibility for a German European country to conduct business with those persons, companies, organizations, and institutions. The third group is the so-called critical end use, and here we are speaking of a good when it is used for military purposes or for nuclear purposes. Those are the regulations in a quite fast way to sum up the export control overview of Germany, of the European Union. The next area that I want to touch on is the so-called Inco terms or delivery terms. In the current version, it's the 2020 that have received their validity on the 1st of January this year. And the regulation area of the Inco terms is on a general basis where the goods is being delivered. So it is determining the point of delivery or moreover, which party arranges and pays for the transport and the supplementary services, which party, the importer or the exporter, carries the risk if steps are not fulfilled, which party carries the risk during the transport, and most importantly, that's why I've highlighted it here in a red color, the regulation of the cost and risk transfer from the seller to the buyer. It has been defined in the so-called Inco term where it takes place. The Inco terms does not regulate or address the transfer of ownership. You have to address this in the contract of sale. Here we have the overview of the obligations in a systematic way of the seller and the buyer. The seller's obligations are defined under the points A1 to A10, and the obligations of the buyer are defined in a way of mirror, we can say, within B1 to B10. And for me personally, the most important points is of course here the aspects within the number 3 and 9. There we determine exactly when the transfer of risks happens and the allocation of costs takes place. Here I have placed all the Inco terms that are active at the moment in the 2020 version. And what I want to tell you within this slide is avoid in your import or export activities the Inco term X works and also the delivered duty paid. Those two Inco terms are not convenient with cross-border activities, so you should basically not use them. The regulations of the destination countries, what I want to highlight here is, especially when you are exporting products out of Germany, for instance, it is always difficult to find out the regulations of the countries like what kind of documents are required when I'm exporting a good, for instance, to Russia. And there are some popular publications in Germany. For the first one, it's the so-called Konsulats- und Mustervorschriften, which are published by the Chamber of Commerce in Hamburg. It is a tool that is in place for years now. And also another popular publication within this means is the so-called Exportbestimmungen in andere Länder. Those two examples are probably the most popular ones that you can find. And like for an instance, when we want to export to Russia, you have to basically give the importer some kind of documents that he requires in order to import the goods. For instance, he needs the commercial invoice twofold. It has to be in Russian. It has to be signed and stamped by the company, and also the customs tariff numbers have to be listed on the invoice. The certificate of origin from the Chamber of Commerce is required. There is a packing list, fivefold, to be added to the documents. Depending on the goods, potentially you also have to have a certificate of conformity according to the Russian or Eurasian regulations, and sometimes, depending also on the destination, here for Russia it is required that your packing instructions for wood pellets have to fulfill the standard ISPM number 15. A database that I want to introduce here with this slide is when you export goods, an alternative to the publications from the site before is the so-called market access database. It's free of charge to be used within the European country and with the countries of the accession of the European country. Here I have a product with the customs tariff number in the 4 digits 301 for tube and pipes of iron and steel. And the website is divided in so-called 3 parts. On the left side we find the so-called country overview. Here you find all the necessary information on a general basis when you import products to Russia. On in the middle section with the general requirements, you find general commercial documents that have to be donated by the exporter for the importer, such as the certificate of origin, the commercial invoice, a packing list. And on the right side, on the section of the specific requirements, you find the product relevant regulations in Russia. For instance, if a certificate of conformity or a certificate of fire safety or a declaration of conformity is required, and you can enter each section to see the detailed aspects of it. And the following 4 slides are just for later on when you receive the presentation. You can use them as a checklist if you're exporting out of Germany, which topics and subjects you should definitely consider. And vice versa, I have done the preparation also for the import. So if you're exporting products from a third country into the European Union, where can you find information? What are the duties? What are the documents that are required for the German importer when you're selling a product, for instance, out of your country to Germany? And here are the popular links where you can basically gather some information. We have a question that I real quick want to answer before I pass the words to my colleague, Ms. Katrin Lange. The question is about, I have a question about exporting second-hand machines or instruments from Germany to Middle East and CIS countries, included Iran as well as Russia. Is there any serious restriction for exporting to this kind of countries? Yes, there might be some restrictions. We have to check because Iran and Russia are so-called embargoed countries by the European Union. So we have to see what the technical parameters of these goods are in order to basically say yes, it is possible, or potentially in the worst case there is a restriction or a prohibition, I will contact you after the webinar in order to clarify the details of it. So I thank you for your attention, and I will give over to my colleague, Ms. Katrin Lange.
Well, thank you, Mr. Peuratz, for the insights and for this really forced parcours through all the regulations that you encounter if you're dealing with imports and exports. So I think what we were trying to bring to you today is that yes, you have to follow the rules if it comes to international contracts and if it comes to imports and exports. And the second thing, yes, there are experts that you can always contact, either in your local Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or just contact the Chamber of Commerce and Industry where you are going to set up your business, for instance. And of course, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know if you have any further and really specific questions. So thank you for your attention so far. Here we have some web links for you. Please use the chance to register and sign up for our Startup Germany tour starting in October 25, that's the date. Before you do that, get in touch with your local German Chamber of Commerce abroad. They would be more than happy to answer all your questions and to guide you through the registration process. And it's really going to be a great program that is waiting for you. So we in Düsseldorf, for instance, would be responsible for doing the program for the vertical logistic and mobility. The IHK Stuttgart, the IHK Dortmund will do something for smart city. The IHK in Cologne is preparing InsurTech vertical. And so we are looking very much forward to welcome you in October to the Startup Germany Tour Nordrhein-Westphalia, the digital edition. I also would like to take the opportunity to tell you when will be the next webinar for the webinar series Access to Germany. So this webinar today was the fourth in a row of webinars. And the next webinar will focus on opportunities through and after Corona crisis, and it will take place on the 29th of September. So please mark your calendars already. I also want to thank all our partners that make the tour possible, especially the IHKs in the Rhineland area and the Ruhr region. A special shout out here to IHK Dortmund. I want to thank all the German chambers of commerce abroad that are such valuable partners and that bring so much into our network. And of course, I would like to thank nrw.invest for being a partner of this tour for so many years. And yeah, and if you want to know more about the tour, if you want to sign up for the tour, if you want to get some information what's going on, then there are some web links. Just follow them and you will learn more. So I hope we see you next to one of our next events. And of course, we would like your feedback. Your opinion is always important to us, or maybe you are missing a subject that we should cover during one of the webinars. And yeah, so it was a pleasure hosting you today at IHK Düsseldorf, and we hope to see you at some other occasion, and we will meet you again at the Startup Germany Tour 2020. Bye!